A world of hedging, how the unilateral U.S. is reshaping alliances. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our special focus on the state of the world. In these first weeks of 2026, a seemingly unconnected set of global events is painting a remarkably coherent picture of a world in profound realignment. We are seeing deep structural shifts as nations, including long-standing American allies, recalibrate their strategies in the face of a more unilateral and transactional superpower. Let's start with two pivotal diplomatic events in Asia and North America. First, in Seoul and Beijing. Just last week, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung concluded a highly anticipated state visit to China, his first since taking office. This was not a routine exchange. He was accompanied by a massive delegation of over 200 top business leaders from semiconductors to green energy. The outcome was 15 new cooperation agreements spanning technology, trade, and the environment. During the visit, Premier Li Qiang emphasized the deep interembeddedness of the two nations' industrial and supply chains and called for moving away from zero-sum thinking. Why this intense outreach from Seoul? Analysts point to a clear strategy: pragmatic diversification. Amidst global economic uncertainty, South Korea is actively deepening ties with its largest trading partner to secure economic stability and future growth in advanced sectors like AI and digital economy. It's a hedge against over-reliance on any single market. Second, a journey about to take flight from Ottawa. In a landmark move, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is set to visit China next week. This will be the first visit by a Canadian leader in nearly 9 years, signaling a deliberate and significant thaw after a period of deep freeze in relations. The rationale from Ottawa is strikingly candid. Canada can no longer afford a highly dependent economic model with over 75% of its exports going to a single market, the United States. The government's stated goal is to build economic resilience by expanding into non-U.S. markets, and China, as its second-largest trading partner, is the obvious and crucial option. Carney's mission is to restart a complex long-term repositioning, with energy exports and agricultural trade high on the agenda. What is the common thread driving both a key Asian ally and a North American neighbor to actively re-engage with China? To understand that, we must look across the Atlantic to a crisis that is shaking the very foundations of the Western Alliance: Greenland. The news from Washington has been startling. The U.S. administration has openly declared its desire to acquire Greenland from Denmark, a NATO ally, and has stated it is considering all options, including the use of military force. This is framed as a national security priority. While the strategic motives are clear: controlling Arctic shipping lanes and accessing vast rare earth mineral deposits, the method has sent shockwaves through Europe. European leaders from 7 nations, including Denmark, France, and Germany, swiftly issued a joint statement condemning the move and affirming that only Denmark and Greenland can decide their own affairs. European media has lambasted it as a display of classic hegemonic thinking and a severe breach of the international order. An expert from the Arctic Institute warned that a U.S. military attack on a NATO ally would mean the complete end of NATO. This Greenland affair is not an isolated incident. It is the most dramatic symptom of a deeper pathology in U.S. foreign policy under its current leadership. A recent annual U.S. National Security Strategy report reportedly framed Europe not as a partner but as an ideological and geopolitical rival. This shift from partner to competitor in official doctrine explains a lot. It explains why the U.S. feels it can strong-arm allies on territory. And it explains why those allies are now looking elsewhere for economic certainty and strategic breathing room. But the transatlantic strain isn't only about territory. It's also about rules and economics. On January 1, 2026, the European Union's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, a carbon tariff, entered its full implementation phase. While framed as a climate measure, it has sparked a major trade dispute. China has lodged a strong official protest, accusing the EU of unfair and discriminatory treatment by setting disproportionately high carbon default values for Chinese products and violating World Trade Organization principles. Beijing sees this as unilateralism and trade protectionism disguised in green clothing and has vowed to take all necessary measures in response. Here, the EU is asserting its own regulatory sovereignty, a form of economic strategic autonomy, which creates friction not just with Washington but also with other major trading powers like China. So what is the deep, unifying analysis? We are witnessing a global hedging movement triggered by a single source, a United States that is perceived as an unpredictable and self-interested hegemony. A top Chinese think tank's annual forum recently concluded that the world faces a Trump 2.0 strategic shock, leading nations to universally seek strategic autonomy and hedge against over-reliance on the United States. The U.S., in its quest for absolute security and economic advantage, is treating friend and foe with similar transactional disregard, from threatening ally sovereignty over Greenland to unilateral trade policies. This behavior is not strengthening its alliances, it is actively dismantling the trust and cohesion that held them together for decades. The rest of the world is not banding together against the U.S. in a unified bloc, but rather scrambling to build safety nets and alternative options away from it. South Korea and Canada seek economic diversification through China. Europe seeks defense and regulatory autonomy. This is a multipolar world not by grand design but by defensive necessity. Looking to the future, we can predict several key trends. First, the accelerated fraying of traditional alliances. NATO will survive, but its political trust is severely damaged. European investment in its own defense capabilities will spike. Second, economic networks will rewire. De-risking and resilience will be the watchwords, leading to more regionalized and duplicated supply chains. This isn't pure decoupling, it's complex diversification with middle powers like Korea and Canada playing all sides to survive. Third, the global South's leverage will grow. As major powers compete for influence, resources, and votes in institutions, countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America will find they can negotiate better terms. Finally, systemic instability will increase. With the old security and trade guarantor acting erratically, more regional flashpoints could ignite, and ad hoc coalitions will form on specific issues, making global coordination on crises like climate change even harder. In our final discussion and judgment, the conclusion is this. The United States, in its pursuit of short-term tactical gains, be it an island, a trade advantage, or domestic political points, is catalyzing a long-term strategic realignment that ultimately diminishes its own influence. It is teaching the world that reliance on America is a risk. The visits to Beijing from Seoul and Ottawa are direct consequences of this lesson. The world is not choosing sides in a new Cold War. It is desperately trying to build more doors and exits in a house it feels is being unilaterally controlled by a volatile landlord. The era of predictable, institutionalized U.S. leadership is over, replaced by an era of opportunistic hedging. The stability of the past 7 decades was built on the reliability of American alliances. We are now entering a period where the foundational principle for every nation, large and small, is to become less reliant on anyone else, especially the once indispensable nation. The great hedging game has begun, and it will define geopolitics for a generation.